Hello, pen pals. Welcome again. We're going to continue reading Walt Disney An American Original, Section 2, Chapter 10. I hope you guys are enjoying your weekend. So, this is a relatively short chapter, so this won't be very, very long. And again, we're going to start in 1931. By 1931, Walt was employing a dozen story and gagmen, 40 animators, 45 assistant animators, 30 inkers and painters, and a 24-piece orchestra, plus camera operators, electricians, soundmen, and other technicians. In the 6 years since Lost Falls Wald the Rabbit, the Disney staff had grown from 6 to 187. The turnover in creative personnel was high. Because Burt Gillett was credited as director of Three Little Pigs, he was quickly hired away by another cartoon studio. The major studios recognized from the Disney example that gold could be mined from short cartoons, and they began making their own. One cartoon producer made a habit of luring away Disney artists after each Disney success. Let Disney win the awards and train the artists, said the rival. I'll hire them away and make the money. It was a logical plot, but it somehow failed in execution. The rival's cartoons could never match the Disney quality. The nation still hadn't escaped the Depression, and new young artists were easy to find. Within the space of 2 or 3 years, Walt hired the animators who, along with Les Clark, were to form his basic crew for decades to come. Milt Kahl, Frank Thomas, Mark Davis, Wooly Reitherman, Eric Larson, John Lounsbury, Ward Kimball, Ollie Johnston. All came to Disney with little or no knowledge of animation. Walt wanted to shorten the apprentice period and prepare the newcomers, and the studio veterans who were willing to learn for the challenges he was envisioning. In 1934, he converted the Disney Art School to a full-time basis. Instead of a limited schedule of night classes, he put Don Graham on the payroll to work 3 days at the studio and 2 nights in classes. Graham sat for hours with Walt in sweatboxes as they reviewed the photographed pencil sketches of the new animators. Twice a week, Graham took groups of artists to the Griffith Park Zoo to sketch animals. At the studio, the artists spent half a day drawing in live classes, half a day studying production methods. Night school was expanded to 5 nights a week, with 150 students attending classes in animation, character drawing, layouts, and backgrounds. Early in 1935, Walt's plans for the future were taking shape, and he instructed Don Graham, I need 300 artists. Find them. A massive talent search was launched through run ads and newspapers from California to New York. Graham opened an office in the RCA buildings in Manhattan and interviewed applicants and reviewed their portfolios. In a long, insightful memo to Don Graham in 1935, Walt articulated better than he ever had before his beliefs about animation. Drawn from his 16 years in the medium, he began by saying that he wanted to talk with Graham about establishing a very systematic training course for our young animators, and a plan of approach for our older animators. He had been encouraged by the results of the school thus far. After lectures by such veterans as Norman Ferguson, Fred Moore, Ham Lusk, and Fred Spencer, the quality of animation at the studio increased measurably. Walt listed the qualities of a good animator. 1. Good draftsmanship. 2. Knowledge of caricature, of action as well as features. 3. Knowledge and appreciation of acting. 4. Ability to think up gags and put over gags. 5. Knowledge of story under construction and audience values. And 6. Knowledge and understanding of all the mechanical and detailed routine involved in his work, in order that he may be able to apply his other abilities without becoming tied in a knot by lack of technique along these lines. Walt was convinced that a scientific approach to the art of animation could be achieved. Then he discoursed on his own conclusions about animation. The first duty of the cartoon is not to picture or duplicate real action or things as they actually happen, but to give a caricature of life in action, to picture on the screen things that have run through the imagination of the audience. to bring to life dream fantasies and imaginative fancies that we have all thought of during our lives or have pictures to us in various forms during our lives. Also, to caricature things of life as it is today, or make fantasies of things we think of today. A good many of the men interpreted the idea of studying the actual motion. They think it is. Oh, excuse me. A good many of the men misinterpret the idea of studying the actual motion. They think it is our purpose merely to duplicate these things. This misconception should be cleared up before all. I definitely feel that we cannot do the fantastic things based on the real unless we first know the real. This point should be brought out very clearly to all new men, and even the older men. Comedy, to be appreciated, must have contact with the audience. This we all know, but sometimes forget. By contact, I mean that there must be a familiar, subconscious association somewhere or at some time the audience has felt or met with or seen or dreamt the situation pictured. A study of the best gags and audience reactions we have had will prove that the action or situation is something based on an imaginative experience or a direct life connection. This is what I mean by contact with the audience. When the action or the business loses its contact, it becomes silly and meaningless to the audience. Therefore, the true interpretation of caricature is the exaggeration of an illusion of the actual, possible, or probable. That idea, behind the things I just mentioned above, can be incorporated in every stage of instruction, from the life drawing clear on through to the planning and staging of the work. I have often wondered why, in your life drawing class, you don't have your men look at the model and draw a caricature of the model, rather than an actual sketch, but instruct them to draw the caricature in good form, basing it on the actual model. I noticed a little caricature of one of the models in the life class made by Ward Kimball, and it struck me that there was an approach to the work that we should give consideration. I don't see why, using this method, you can't give the class all the fundamentals of drawing they need and still combine the work with the development of a sense of caricature. During the few brief years since Steamboat Willie, a creative pattern had evolved at the Disney Studios. At the top, of course, was Walt, who supervised the entire process in a total and comprehensive way. Then came the directors, who were responsible for assembling the creative efforts and carrying out Walt's dictates in terms of character and action. The story department, with Walt in constant collaboration, providing plots and gags. The animators made the drawings that gave life to the cartoon. They were aided by assistants and in-betweeners who relieved the animators of the tedium of multiple drawings. Finally came the women who copied the drawings on celluloid with ink and applied the colors. Of all the contributors to the creative process, Walt had greatest respect for the animators. Throughout his career, Walt maintained a curious relationship with the animating breed. He kidded them, abused them, praised and berated them, but above all, he recognized their indispensable contribution to the art of animation. It was something he could not do himself. His early attempts at animation were admittedly primitive. His work was fast, but it seldom rose above the level of comic strip humor along the lines of George McManus in Bringing Up Father. His relationship with animators formed an abiding pattern. The cough was an important part of it. The Disney cough, aggravated by his heavy smoking of cigarettes, was prevailing and individualistic. It could be heard down the corridors of the Hyperion studio and later at Burbank, and it announced his presence, passing or imminent. For the lazy, the cough could inspire terror. Others, sure of their accomplishment, found it reassuring. It meant that their work might be reviewed and perhaps approved. The cough, his animators were sure, was a courtesy to them. It sounded Walt's impending arrival, and although he ran the studio and paid their salaries, he respected their privacy and would not barge into their offices unannounced. But Walt didn't mean the cough to summon his workers to attention for his arrival. He was irritated when he entered an office to find the artists had hurried to their desks after hearing them. "I don't care if you're loafing," he said angrily. "Everybody gets tired. If you feel stale, get some fresh air, but don't let me catching you jumping back to your desks." Another Disney pattern, the drumming fingers. Walt's fingers were expressive and forever moving. He made eloquent use of his hands while he was describing a cartoon plot to an animator or even a casual acquaintance. He had an artist's fingers, narrow and pliant, and hence he was good at making things. His animators learned that the fingers acted as a device to reveal his degree of approval or annoyance. If Walt was engrossed with the action on the screen in a sweatbox, his fingers would be motionless. If his interest started to drift, he began to drum on the arm of his chair. Animators listened for the sound, and if the drawing became a tattoo, they knew they would be sent back to their drawing boards. There could be no doubt that Walt Disney was the boss. He enjoyed the position and he enforced it, but he could be tolerant of the foibles of his artist. A Disney favorite was Roy Williams, a zany, roly-poly gagman who had arrived at the studio in 1930. One day, Williams found that his salary had been reduced by a director because of tardiness. Williams rigged a bucket on a door, and the director was splashed with water. The director stormed into Walt's office and demanded that Williams be fired. "That's personal business between you and Roy," Walt replied. "Now get the hell out of here. You're getting my carpet all wet." Another Disney favorite was Norman Ferguson. He was an animating natural, an artist whose knack of capturing character comedy helped make Pluto one of the most durable of the Disney stars. Walt feared that Ferguson's genius would be blurred in the copying of the drawings by his assistant. Nick George. To prevent that, Walt turned over a wastebasket and sat on it next to George's desk. "Now, don't get too polished, Nick," Walt instructed as George did his copying. "Keep that rough quality of Fergie's." Ferguson could turn out up to 40 feet of animation a day. The average was 10 to 15, and he knew his worth. He asked Walt to pay him $300 a week. "But that's as much as I'm getting Fergie," Walt protested. But he agreed to pay Ferguson $300 a week. Walt seldom surveyed his animators' work while they were creating. He understood the fragile nature of the creative process, and he wouldn't intrude. But there was nothing to stop him after the animator had left for the day. Walt's nighttime visits to the office became legendary, and animators often left their best work on the drawing table overnight, anticipating that Walt would inspect it. But sometimes they arrived in the morning to find crumpled sheets of paper rescued from wastebaskets and pinned on a storyboard with a notation in the unmistakable Disney script: "Quit throwing the good stuff away." Well, today is a short one. That was one chapter, but chapter 11 is quite long and would take us beyond our normal time. So I do apologize for the short episode today. But this too will be good in the long run. And remember, today's special moments are tomorrow's memories. Have a good day.